Hi, welcome to English Club TV. I'm Holly Holborn.
I'm Ashley Jenkins.
And our guest today is Dr. Penn Pearson. So, what's with the Triceratops around your neck?
The Triceratops dinosaur for me is a symbol of creativity. It came about when I was in 3rd grade and we had a unit on dinosaurs, and our teacher let us make any of the dinosaurs we wanted, and I chose the Triceratops. And we were given clay, so out of clay I made a Triceratops dinosaur, and in making that dinosaur I decided I wanted to do something creative with my life. And to this day the Triceratops reminds me of that. So when I was at a writers' conference about 5 years ago with a group of friends, we went into a jewelry store in Deadwood, South Dakota, and I found this Triceratops.
Perfect.
And so when I see it, when I wear it and I see it, it reminds me of my commitment to my creative life.
Wonderful.
My next question is, what inspired you to teach?
I think students did. I began as a graduate teaching assistantship when I was working on my master's in English, and it was a way to support myself. And we were given 2 sections of Composition 1 to teach. And I thought, I'll just do this because it's an easy way to support myself. Mm-hmm. But while I was doing it, I realized that I had a connection with students that I couldn't have imagined. And looking back at it, I realize now that the connection was because I liked being a college student so much that in teaching college students, it reminded me of being their age. And I still feel like I'm teaching myself, in a sense, at their age when I teach college to this day.
Speaking of your graduate studies, what was your emphasis when you're pursuing that?
Well, I took a number of different courses in different areas of literature, but when it came to write my critical thesis, I decided I wanted to write on a female poet. And so I looked mainly in 20th century poetry, both American and British female poets. And I discovered a poet named Charlotte Mew. And I decided I would write my critical thesis on her poetry.
Okay.
And so that became really my emphasis. And it was through actually writing my critical thesis on Charlotte Mew that I decided to write poetry. So until that time, I thought I'd be a literary scholar if I went on and did my doctorate. But after that experience, I decided, yes, I wanted to go on and do my doctorate, but instead of doing a scholarly dissertation, I wanted to do a creative dissertation.
Okay. And then she's the poet that you recently wrote about, right?
Correct. Even while I was writing my critical thesis, I was thinking about what I could do with her and her life creatively. And what I realized is that her life would make a great novel. And so my most recent finished project is a novel of her life. Awesome. And it's titled Bloomsbury's Late Rose, because she came of age late in terms of her poetry. She didn't start writing poetry until she was older, and it wasn't until she was in her 50s when she became famous in Bloomsbury and London overall.
Wonderful.
This kind of goes back to the Triceratops question, but what really made you go from crafting like a Triceratops out of clay to wanting to be into the literature and the writing?
That's a great question. So how did I go from the visual arts to literary arts? Actually by trial and error. I actually was a chemistry major when I first went to college, and that's because I was good at chemistry and math. So I thought, I'll be a chemist. I did fine in my chemistry courses my first year at Iowa State in Ames, Iowa, but there wasn't any passion. I didn't have any passion for that discipline. And so I looked around at friends and realized they were, in the arts, and in particular they were in the visual arts. Iowa State has a great art program and design program, and so I decided I'd become an art major. So I took the prerequisite drawing courses and did very badly, and discovered through them that I couldn't draw. And that seemed to be like a basic skill needed by any type of visual arts major. And so I floundered around then looking for another major. And while I was floundering, I took a general education course at Briarcliff. I transferred in between time. It was a general education course in British Romanticism.
Okay.
And yes, and it was a hard course, and it was a wonderful course. And it was in that course that I read John Keats, who is still one of my very favorite poets to this day. But the British Romantics are responsible for making me an English major. And once I became an English major, I felt like I was home. And so it was through the visual arts that I came to the literary arts, both literature and writing.
I think the nice thing about English is it's both creative and practical.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yes. Yeah.
being an
'cause-
art major would be great, but I don't know what I'd do with it. So it's like,
Well, I had a similar experience, but with math. When you were talking about chemistry, I was good at math, and I like did all right in the courses. And then I just had a moment where I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. And then I finally found English, and it's such a versatile degree that it's so great,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you can do so much with it. And it's almost hard to decide what to do with it.
yeah, baby Ashley wanted to be an animator at Disney, but then I realized I can't draw animals. I'm like, what can I be with drawing people? A caricature artist? Like, that's not a bad thing to do, but I was like, that wouldn't make me happy. So,
As an English professor, I'm guessing you read quite a bit in your leisure time, and we were just wondering, what kind of works are you drawn to?
I don't read as much as I would like to. I will say that first. I read a lot to prepare for my classes, and I feel like in my downtime I'm mentally tired. And so if I do something, it's often physical, like working out to relax. But when I am able to read, I'm really drawn to literary fiction. So books, say, by contemporary Irish authors, such as Colm Toibin, I'm very much drawn to, and classical literary fiction, Moby Dick, for instance. And so I usually mix it up a bit. I like to read before I go to bed, regardless of how tired I am. So I usually have two books going, one a literary classic and one a contemporary literary fiction novel, such as Brooklyn by Toibin, or another novel that's related to Brooklyn, also by Toibin, called Nora Webster. And those are the most recent books I've read, and I found them both fascinating. I also love poetry, and I love reading it, but I don't find that it's relaxing to read poetry before going to bed, and that's my main reading time. And so I read less poetry than I would like to.
Okay, that makes sense, because I feel like poetry always gets your mind going, and it doesn't help you relax to go to sleep very much.
yeah, I find poetry, it's like, at first when I started reading poetry, I thought it was so frustrating. Like, I'd see a poem, like, in like our high school thing that we'd have to read, and I'd be like, dang it, it takes so much to like figure out what's happening. But once you figure it out, you can kind of like appreciate it more.
Yeah, but I definitely know what you mean about reading fiction and just being able to drift off into the world of the book almost. Yeah.
And those are my favorite books, the ones that grab you and that pull you into their world and that take you away from yours. And so you don't think about what went wrong or right with your day. Instead, you're just immersed in that world, enjoying it.
This past summer, I read The Picture of Dorian Gray, and it was so great because I had some pretty weird dreams, but it was nice. So, what are you reading right now?
Right now, I am reading the book A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. It's an excellent book. I got to it via the movie, A Single Man, starring Colin Firth, and I love that movie. So I read the book about the time the movie came out. I recently lost my father, and so I've been reading books about people who are mourning, and that book is largely about him mourning his lover. And so I'm reading it and experiencing his grief and my own at the same time. So it's really, helping me process my own loss. Nora Webster, another book that I recently read, as I mentioned, was also about grief. It is about a widow who is grieving the loss of her husband. And there was moments in that book where I felt like the author absolutely positively had to have just gone through a recent loss of someone he loved in order to capture so vividly, so wonderfully what it was like to grieve. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm reading right now.
Awesome. I might have to check that out.
It's very good.
This kind of goes along with the last question just because I think it's interesting. But is there anything you're watching right now? Like, I guess it kind of goes along with just the casual reading.
Okay, right now I'm with a friend. I'm watching a series from the 90s. It's a BBC series called The House of Elliot. And it's about two sisters in turn of the century London who are left destitute by their father, who has passed away. So they mourn his death, and then they get to work figuring out how to support themselves. And they originally work as dressmakers for another designer and eventually open up their own fashion house. And it's a great series. I've watched it before, so it's a pleasure to watch it again. And it's longish, and that's what I like best about it, because I get immersed in it, and then it's not like it suddenly ends. It's actually 3 seasons long and 36 episodes. And each of the episodes is 50 minutes long, so it's fun to watch.
Nice. So, a final question for you. If you could have dinner with any author, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
That's such a hard question. Can I have a dinner party and have a whole bunch?
Of course.
Yeah. If you want to name a few.
A nice author potluck.
Yes.
Yes. Imagine what, say, Wallace Stevens would bring to that potluck. He's definitely someone I would invite to dinner. He might be my first choice, or Charlotte Mew might be my first choice. But I love both of their poetry. I would be interested also, not just because I like both of their poetry, but I'd be interested in having them to dinner because both of them led such interesting lives. I mean, Wallace Stevens was a lawyer for an insurance company. Charlotte Mew never worked outside the home, but supported herself in part from her writing, and had a very, very difficult life, just as Wallace Stevens in many ways did. Wallace Stevens was married, unhappily married. Charlotte Mew never married and took care of her invalid mother and watched 2 of her siblings become institutionalized for schizophrenia.
Oh, wow.
So it'd be interesting to hear about their lives, and also be great to hear them read their poetry. They're the 2 authors, I think, first and foremost, I would like to have to dinner.
You can start your own Dead Poets Society.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Pearson, for joining us today, and have a great one.